y'all, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video we're going to be doing another free pattern review of Instagram patterns, and specifically Instagram patterns that are Halloween themed. So I've got a lot of patterns to show you here. We're going to go over 9 different patterns that people have suggested to me or I've found on Instagram, and we're just going to take a look at them and I'll tell you my thoughts on them. But first off, I wanted to address the elephant in the room. I actually cut my hair recently. I cut about like 5 inches off. My husband kind of helped me do it, so this is the first time that you're seeing that. So I may look a little bit different, but if you actually look back at like my first videos, this is kind of around the length and hairstyle I kind of had when I first started doing YouTube videos. So it's a little bit more than a year ago. I looked like this, so it's not super unfamiliar. I mean, like, I don't look that different. My hair is just 5 inches shorter, so that may come as a shock to some of you. So I just wanted to address that right away. But anyway, first off, I always like to go over the criteria that I use to rate these patterns. So number 1 is, would I use the pattern again? This always comes down to its market prepability. If I'm able to make a bunch of them really fast, typically if they're no-sew, they'll be rated higher because they're easier to get through and faster to get through as well. And also just like the ease of being able to make the pattern without any difficulty in understanding what the pattern's trying to tell you. Number 2 is, can I understand the pattern easily? And that kind of ties into number 1 a little bit. I kind of touched on it a little bit in my explanation, but basically you want your pattern to be easily understood by any skill level of crocheter, and this is typically due to photos and diagrams that you include to illustrate what you're saying if your steps are a little bit more complicated than people are used to, as well as detailed instructions about how a certain stitch is supposed to be made if it's not a certain stitch that people usually run into as well. And then number 3 is, do I like the final product? That really comes down to if it's a case of expectations versus reality, where your finished product looks nothing like the author's finished product in their photos. And that is really important when it comes down to trying to figure out what you want to make. If you're just looking at a pattern photo, you want it to look exactly how it's typically supposed to come out, no matter who's making it. The first pattern I reviewed for this video is the Worry Doll by ball.o.yarn, and this pattern was suggested to me by Sweet Face Customs. It's a cute pattern, no sew for the most part. I think the only things you really have to crochet separately and so on are the arms, and you attach them at 2 different spots on the body. So where it's supposed to come in, which is called the shoulder in the pattern, and then where you sew it to its tummy, so it kind of looks like it's like holding its stomach because it's worried, or holding itself because it's worried. I used Gumdrop by Premier Yarns to make this. It's all one skein of yarn that made this. It just has natural color changes in it, so it kind of looks like he's almost like wearing overalls or something because of where the color changes. So yeah, that's a little bit interesting. So my first note has to do with the legs attaching to one another. So first off, it's a chain 4 in between the legs, and then you single crochet into the first leg. When you do that, it tells you to finish off that leg, and when you finish off crocheting around that leg, you only have 9 stitches. That is not accurate. The way that it's written, there should be 10 stitches. It says single crochet to attach and then crochet 9. I'm pretty sure it's a typo because total you should have 10 stitches at the end of that leg. So it's not a huge deal. It's just a little bit confusing to come to the end of that round around the leg and see that there's supposed to be 9 stitches when there should really be 10. Another thing that I noticed about that same round is when you attach the legs to each other, the feet kind of have like a club kind of thing. So you have decreases at the front of the foot to give it that like curved foot effect. And when you attach the legs to one another, it doesn't tell you how to orient the foots or which stitch number to single crochet into so that they're facing the correct direction. So when I did mine, I had to unravel and then reattach and do that whole row over again just to make sure that my legs were facing the right direction. But even so, I think this one is still facing inward, whereas this one is facing like pretty straight. So having some direction there to tell you what number stitch to crochet into to attach so that they're facing the right direction might be really helpful for some people, especially if you struggle with orientation like I do when crocheting legs together. It is really difficult to figure out where you're supposed to put your stitch so that it looks right, and it's hard to figure out if it looks right until you get to the end of that row, because that is when they're fully attached to each other and fully secure and won't really wiggle around a lot. Also, at the end of row 10, it tells you that this will be the new start of your round, but it doesn't tell you what stitch is the first stitch of your round at that point. I opted for the first stitch that I created after the chain, so that single crochet into the first leg off of that 4 chains was what I marked as my first stitch of the round, which is what I typically do whenever I do any sort of technique that allows you to connect the legs together without sewing. My next note is that when you place the eyes, it tells you that there should be 5 stitches of cross instead of telling you how many stitches should be in between them. And mine look a little bit different than hers does, specifically because she has some eyes that have the iris, which is the pupil, which is the black part of your eye, that are like closer together in the center instead of being dead center in the middle of the safety eye. Whereas I don't have any eyes like that, so I had to kind of do some embroidering to cover part of the eye to make it look a little bit more like that. Having those eyes on there just flat without any embroidery around them just kind of looked weird to me, so that is why I ended up doing that. But anyway, going back to the 5 stitches across for the eyes, I think that's confusing because depending on the size of eyes you have, that will change. And definitely, if you just tell people how many visible stitches should be in between the eyes, that should be a lot more accurate and a lot less confusing to some people. The next thing I noticed about this pattern is once you get to the body continued page, there are 2 row 25s. I'm sure that is absolutely just a typo. It's just a little bit confusing. And then really the last thing that I would note that I have already kind of brought up, but the eyes really make this look right. I think the eyes that I have on here now, they're still okay, but hers are really what make it look adorable. So I would really recommend that if you make this pattern, make sure you have the right kind of eyes, because even if you just did like plain black safety eyes, it might look weird as well, even more weird than mine, I think. Anyway, I would give this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. Next pattern that I reviewed is the candy corn guy, and this is a pattern by Magic Filament, and this pattern's a little different than what I'm used to, specifically because there's only one slide of the pattern and it's just the cover photo of what your candy corn is supposed to look like when it's done, and then all of the instructions for the pattern are actually in the description of the post. Even that being so, there are some mistakes in the pattern that I will point out. That being said, I think because the pattern designer wrote the instructions in the description, she can easily edit them, and that way it's really easy to make revisions and not have to re-release the pattern, so that's really convenient for her. Anyway, we have 2 different versions of my candy corn here. You can't really tell super obviously that there's a color difference on camera, but this one right here is made with highlighter orange instead of this orange right here. I ran out of this orange, and there's kind of a subtle difference. This one kind of looks a little bit more washed out, and then this one is just, it glows a little more if you just look at it. Anyway, big difference between these two is that for this one, I color change a row early on every single time that you color change. So you have a bigger yellow section at the bottom here, versus this one doesn't have as tall of an orange yellow section. And I think this way is the way that it's actually supposed to come out based on what her photos look like and where the eyes are placed on that yellow section. Whereas on this one, if you're placing those eyes in the same exact spot, they are much closer to the orange stripe of the candy corn. And the reason that this was kind of confusing is because once you get to the end of a row where you should have color changed, it tells you to color change after you finish that row. So in typical patterns, people tell you to color change in the last stitch of the row prior to the new color. And so because of that confusion there, it says to do whatever instructions for the row that's all supposed to be the same, the new color. Instead, at the end of it, there's just a dash and it tells you to color change. So that is really confusing. I was really curious to see what would happen if you were to color change after the rows where it tells you to color change. And there is the difference there. It's pretty obvious that yellow row looks significantly different, and then this white row up top is a lot wider. The orange row in the middle is the same width, it's just positioned differently on the candy corn. So overall, very slight difference, but you can really tell with the eyes that something's going on there. Another thing about the pattern is if you don't understand where you're starting at the pattern, you wouldn't know what to start your color in. So you're supposed to start it in white and you work from the top down. It doesn't say anything like that in the instructions. It doesn't tell you to start in white or anything like that. So that was a little bit confusing. And then another typo that I saw on the pattern was actually at row 4. It tells you to do 35 single crochets and then an increase, which is impossible. And then you're supposed to somehow end up with 15 stitches at the end. With that stitch number at the end, I was able to figure out that you should be doing 3 single crochets and then an increase instead of 5, but it could be a little bit confusing what she's supposed to mean there. And then finally, my last note is that there's no note in the instructions about how many stitches should be in between the eyes, so I was heavily reliant on her photo to try to figure out how many stitches were in between. So we have a little bit of variance on each of these. So for this one, I think they're a little closer, and then this one, they're a little bit farther apart. This one, I think there's 2 stitches in between, and then this one has 3. And it really is up to you about what you want to do with that. If you just want to figure out where you want to place them yourself, if 2 or 3 is not right for you, that's the nice thing about crocheting your own plushies, is you get to decide what looks the cutest. So yeah, that being said, I think this pattern is really cute. I was able to work through the issues that I had really easily, so it wasn't something that tripped me up or anything like that. And I just love the way that they're just kind of like sitting. And I would give this pattern 4 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed is Spoo the Spider, and this is by munolushop. It's a really cute no-sew pattern, and I was actually really surprised, really happily surprised when I noticed that it was no-sew, so that was really exciting for me. And something that I will admit was making this first one, once I got to row 9, which is when you are at the narrowest decrease in the head, I actually fastened off, and it was like, I don't know, second nature to me, because once you get to a decrease row that small, it was just like 6 stitches. I just naturally want to fasten off, and I actually noticed that in, I was making some Mama Made Minis knotted loveys recently, and the goose pattern specifically, it doesn't fasten off at the neck. You just continue working the head to the body, and I ended up fastening off for the same reason. I just got to a row that was like small enough that I figured the next step would be fastening off, and that's just what I ended up doing. So that was really silly of me. It's no-sew and it's super cute. My first major note is about the legs themselves. It's kind of confusing about how they are worked. The thing that tripped me up was that you're doing the same thing with your leg rows 4 rows in a row. So rows 4 through 7, I believe, you're doing the same thing over and over again. And it was a little confusing to me how you were supposed to work around the legs, if you were supposed to place legs behind one another, or what you're supposed to do. And major thing that you can probably notice once you look at my spider here is that he kind of appears a little lopsided. So when he's laying down like this, you can kind of tell that the legs on this side are higher than the legs on this side, and that is just because I wasn't sure how you were supposed to make them symmetrical using the instructions provided. I think the pattern might benefit from having some symmetry consideration in the instructions. So when you're working in a circle and you do a leg on this side, you have to place it on the opposite side of where you placed this one on this side so that it looks symmetrical, if that makes sense at all. But basically, the legs are just a little weird. You can definitely tell from the top down. Let me see if this makes it any clearer. They're both kind of hard colors to look at from a camera just because of how bright and colorful they are, but these legs right here are obviously higher up than these are. So that might benefit from just like making the legs a little bit sooner on one side in each of those repeating rows, and maybe then your legs would look a little bit more symmetrical than they do here. But either way, they still are super cute and easy to make. I really wish in the pattern there were more photos about how to do certain steps on them. Photos are always super beneficial to visual learners when you're making a pattern for the first time. But anyway, this pattern is super cute. If it weren't for the legs being a little bit lopsided, I wish I could rate it a little higher, but because the legs are lopsided and it's hard to achieve the same desired effect every time, I would probably rate this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed for this video is Bibi the Bat, and this is a pattern by loops.snuggles, and it's a really cute pattern. It is not no-sew though. And my first major note, other than it not being no-sew, is just that there aren't really any photos of the steps as you make them in the pattern. The pattern is laid out in 2 columns on one page with all the instructions on one page. And I think the pattern could really benefit from having photos for specific instructions, specifically about the ears and the wings and attaching them to the body when you're in the assembly stage. And that would be really, really helpful when it comes to assembling these bats and making sure they look correct. The next thing that I will note is that when you get to the wings step, it comes before the ears. So you make the wings and it gives you a note ahead of time that you're changing from working in the round to working in the row. And the reason that that's different is because in a row, you finish a row and then you chain one and turn and work back over the work that you just finished. And the reason that I kind of stumbled on that was because you finish the wings, and then after you finish the wings, you are supposed to make the ears if you're going in order of the pattern. And once you switch back over to doing the ears, you are working in the round again, but it doesn't note that to you. So if I was writing the pattern, I would probably move the ears over where the wings appear. So I'd make the ears first and then go to the wings and have that note about changing the way that you work. That way, you don't assume that you're still working in the row when you start your ears. And specifically the reason why that matters is because when you're working in the round, I typically will mark the first stitch so that I know when my work is supposed to end. And I was a little worried that I was going to lose track of where my row started. The next thing that I will note about the ears and the wings is assembling was really difficult. It kind of just tells you which rows to sew them onto, but it doesn't tell you how to position them or anything like that. So I was heavily reliant on the photos, and the photos just being finished photos and not work in progress photos to figure out where they were supposed to be placed. And specifically for these ears, you can kind of see the shape of them at the back of this bat. They're kind of diamond shaped, and because of that, it's kind of difficult to figure out the way that you're supposed to orient them so that they look correct on the bat. And I just kind of wish it told you, you know, from the fasten off point, where you left a big strand of yarn to sew them on, position that on whatever side of the body you're supposed to position them. I'm not 100% sure I still sewed them on correctly, but I think this is the closest I could have gotten. And then another thing about sewing those ears on is I kind of sewed them on in like a U shape. So you don't sew them just onto that row that it mentions. You kind of have to sew them on multiple rows to make sure that they stand up properly and they don't flop over. So having additional instructions on that, kind of laying out what you're supposed to be doing, as well as just having some photos to accompany that instruction, would be extremely helpful in sewing on those parts correctly. So on top of the assembly instructions being vague, there was also very vague face details instructions. So I think she adds these irises onto the side of her safety eyes in the pattern. She doesn't say what the face details are. I just assumed that maybe it was just a mouth. So we've got a mouth on here and the irises around the safety eyes, and it definitely adds a lot of character to these guys, but there's no instructions on how she does it, so I just kind of had to wing it. And I know that's not everybody's favorite thing to do, so that's definitely something I had to bring up as well. So that being said, I would give this pattern 3.5 stars out of 5. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is the Tiny Pumpkin, and this is a pattern by Yarn G Less. And it is worked kind of unexpected to what I'm typically used to for making a pumpkin. You're not working row by row like I expected you would be. Most people will make a rectangle and then sew that rectangle together to make a cylinder, and then you would cinch the bottom and top closed to make your pumpkin, and then you would embroider the different sections onto the pumpkin. This one is different because you work in the round, so you work in rounds up to the top of the pumpkin and then you cinch it closed after stuffing it, and then you create those sections using your fasten off yarn. After that, you create the stem and you create this little spiral leaf in one piece and sew it onto the top of the pumpkin. So that was definitely different from what I was expecting this pattern to be. The first thing that I have to note is that this pumpkin is a little bit shorter than her pattern calls for it to be, and that's because I ran out of this orange yarn and had to remove about 4 rows to make sure that I had enough to finish the pumpkin with the decreases that are in the final rows, and then also have enough to embroider those sections onto the pumpkin as well. And then my last note for this pattern is after row 18, which is the final row of the orange part of the pumpkin, it doesn't tell you to sew the hole closed, but I'm almost 100% sure you're supposed to. So that was a little weird to not include that instruction in the pattern as well. But I would give this pattern 4.5 stars out of 5. Really simple, cute, and easy pattern to make. The next pattern I reviewed for this video is the Cauldron Cutie. This is a pattern by kawaiicuddlebug, and mine is a little bit different than hers just because I embroidered on some different colored green on the top. The only real note that I have is about round 2 of this guy, and it's just that it's not super obvious that your bobble stitch and single crochet is supposed to be worked into a single stitch. But anyway, I would give this pattern 4 stars out of 5. Really cute little cauldron. The next pattern that I reviewed for this video is Chubbie Frankie. This is a pattern by Munolushop, and it is no sew, super easy. Really the only thing you have to sew, I don't even think most people think of embroidery as sewing, is just the black line around its head. To signify those that brain surgery it took to make Frankenstein alive again. But yeah, super cute and easy. This pattern, I had no notes on it. It was just awesome, super cute and easy, super quick make, perfect for market prep, and I would give it 5 stars out of 5. The next pattern that I reviewed for this video is Ooooky the Spooky Ghost, and this is a pattern by thetwistedhookmi. Again, I had no notes for this pattern. It was super quick and easy. You work completely no sew from the top to the bottom, and you create these little frills in the front loops of one of your final rows, and then you just do decreases until the end. And I'm just noticing how much this little ghost is like reflecting the highlighter yellow off of my hand. I'm not sure if that's coming up on camera, but that is hilarious. But I never thought of doing a ghost in this color, but I mean, it's fitting. It's like kind of glowing like a ghost would glow. But yeah, super cute and easy. 5 stars out of 5. Another great pattern for Halloween. And the last pattern I reviewed for this video is actually a keychain pattern, and I'm sure you guys have been wondering what this has been doing behind me the whole time. It's specifically because we have a keychain pattern featured in this video. So we have a squishy baby spider, and this is a pattern by allfromjade. I made this in 4 different colors just because it works up so freaking quick. I believe it works up in under 15 minutes, and it is super quick and easy, no sew, perfect for market prep. So make sure you check out this pattern as well if you're interested in another keychain pattern that people will definitely love for Halloween. So With that being said, I'd give that pattern 5 stars out of 5 as well. I didn't have any problems with it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I just really wanted to find some spooky Halloween patterns that you guys would use for market prepping upcoming October markets and September markets. I'm sure they would do well at September markets as well. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up and comment down below what your favorite pattern is out of this video and what you think you're gonna try. And if you enjoy my videos and you want to see more from me in the future, definitely make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified every time I release a new video, you can also hit that notification bell and it will notify you every time. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I'll see y'all next time. Bye!